Please enjoy this message from David Arquette sent in by the fabulous Carrie Tenney.
Hey Ryan, how are you? Thanks for doing the Scream podcast.
Like scary movies?
Uh-huh.
What's your favorite scary movie?
I don't know.
You have to have a favorite. What comes to mind?
You are listening to Scream with Ryan C. Showers, the podcast for Scream fans just like you. Join Ryan every week as he takes a deep dive into the horror film series that defined the 90s and redefined the genre. Scream with Ryan C. Showers is your source for scene and quote analysis, character dissections, and the latest news about upcoming installments of the Scary Movie franchise.
I hear you like horror movies, Curly, but do you like them as much as him?
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Scream with Ryan C. Showers. I'm your host, Ryan C. Showers. Thank you for joining me for today's episode. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Scream with Ryan C. Showers. I'm your host, Ryan C. Showers. Thank you for joining me for today's episode. I truly appreciate everybody out there who supports the podcast either by listening every week, supporting me on social media, or subscribing to the Patreon. So if you haven't subscribed to the Patreon of Scream with Ryan C. Showers, there are so many amazing opportunities that come along with this. So in season 6, we're going to be offering what I'm calling 30 Years of Scream, 30 Questions, a Scream with Ryan C. Showers interview. So this will be offered to eligible Patrons after 3 months of subscription. You get to come on with me for 30 minutes and have an interview where I ask you 30 speedrun questions, but also some deep questions about Scream and your Scream personality and what Scream means to you and how you've also experienced Scream since it's come back to life in the mainstream. That is coming in season 6. Subscribe and you can come on and have a one-on-one with me and celebrate 30 years of Scream for its 30th anniversary. In addition to the interview that's coming in season 6, joining the Patreon gets you access to our community group chats on Instagram. You can come to the group Zooms, which are held quarterly, and the eligibility to come on the podcast with me for main topic episodes by request. Also with the Patreon comes a monthly bonus episode. For most months, I'm going to be releasing an audio commentary of a Scream movie or a Scream-related film. Some months we'll be releasing a group Zoom episode on Patreon that is just released to the Patreon, not the public. I've really enjoyed doing the audio commentaries. I have a library of them at this point. I've done the first 4 Scream films. I've done Halloween. I've done A Nightmare on Elm Street. I've done Halloween H2O. I Know What You Did Last Summer, etc., etc., etc. And I'm so excited to continue doing these as we go into season 6. I need to thank the producers of the podcast. They include TJ Jones, who does all of the graphic design work for the episode title cards. I need to thank Ashley Summers, who is my Taylor Swift girl. She helps me with the Taylor Swift song of the week, but also with the Scream game of the week that you can find on Instagram. Usually we post on Wednesday or Thursday mornings, and you can find her at SquirrelandSpud9 on Instagram. And I also need to thank my friend Fernando. He is FN Prescott on Instagram, and he also runs the Isabel May Online Instagram profile. He helps me with posts throughout the week to keep the social media and Scream love alive. I've had many wonderful experiences and adventures with this podcast, including being on the cover of the Wall Street Journal. Back in 2022, I was interviewed by the Wall Street Journal. So crazy. But none of this would be possible without the people who follow me and support me on social media. So if you haven't subscribed to my profiles there, I'm Scream with RCS across social media, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, etc. Also, if you could please do me a solid and give me 5 stars on Apple or Spotify, that would really go a long way and help me out. In addition, I need to thank the stab investors and daddy ghost faces of Scream with Ryan C. Showers. First, Mama Ghostface, I need to thank Carrie Tenney. I also need to thank daddy ghost faces Corey Wilson, Brett Janovich, and Andrew Dominguez. I need to thank stab investors, including Josh Carr, Amar Karim, Kevin Abner, Ali, Roy Garza, Stevie Shears, P. Dougie05, Gustavo Mora, Mark Vieira, Scream Queens Podcast, both Josh and Justine, Joey Nobarini, aka The Vault, Ryan Not Dying Young, David D, Jess Mariano, Sam Levy, Tamika Jones, Josh Camilleri, Ivan Valance, Christian Ranke, and John Cardy. All right, everyone, thank you. Please enjoy the rest of the episode and consider subscribing to the Patreon, and you can come on for your Scream interview. 30 years of Scream, 30 questions. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Scream with Ryan C. Showers. I'm your host, Ryan C. Showers. So, this week is Courteney Cox's birthday, and I had this idea in my notes to do an episode about Gale Weathers, but not just Gale Weathers in general, not just Yes Queen, Slay Realness, like that. First of all, that's not who I am. I would never do that. But there was an episode topic that was suggested to me about her morality, which I found absolutely fascinating because I love talking about things in really smart, philosophical ways. So, why not get somebody on here with a background in philosophy to help me out with that? So, everyone, please welcome my friend, Ivan. Hey, Ivan.
Hi, always great to be here. Thanks for having me again.
Before we talk about Gale Weathers' morality, I want to ask you, what is your favorite version of Gale?
Well, my favorite version of Gale would have to be Four, and it's not just purely because Four is my favorite film and it's my favorite Scream movie, as you know. And it's not just that. I also think, there's a reason why Four is my favorite Scream movie. So I would say Four, which is not the most common pick. It's generally two. What really struck me about Gale and Four, so I really found the arc of this has been withered has been or withering has been trying to claw her way back up to be really interesting, and it's kind of a complete arc within that one film that really ties into who she was before, and it makes complete sense as just coming off of how we last saw her. It's actually kind of unexpected, because three kind of ended on a happy note, but in real life, things are just gonna play out and not just be what one would think would happen or expect. So I really appreciate that about Gale from Four. And also, Four has my favorite Gale moment probably of all time, which would be the scene where when she comes into the bookstore while Sydney is reading a passage from Out of Darkness, and she has this little moment of sadness, and we see her almost mournful of a life that she thought that she would have, and also just comparing and contrasting herself to Sydney, who had moved on into something different, and her life was kind of just stuck around Ghostface and the Woodsboro murders and stab. Even when Sydney greets her, I found that moment where she couldn't even muster up a smile. Like it's very inauthentic when she congratulates her. I always thought that was so interesting, and it's not just that; she's also really funny, really quippy, and cool in Four.
Well, no, and Four is one of her best performances. Honestly, I don't have my updated Gale ranking yet, and there's a reason why two really gets all the love that it attracts. But I am really drawn to Four. I've always loved her in Four. Before Scream 7, I would have told you my ranking was 4, 2, 3, etc., etc. I love her in 7. I love her in 4. 2 is monumental, so it's really tough. But yeah, I think 4 is an amazing answer. And on the concept of her morality, I think that 3 and 4 are her clearest morally, and maybe 5. I don't know, but I think 3 is her most heroic, and I would say 4 is like a number 2 to that. But before we talk about her morality, because I want to set it up with talking about her evolution from 1 to 3. But Ivan, I wanted to ask you, why did you suggest this specific topic? I feel like you've told me before in the past that you sometimes get frustrated with the social media view of Gale Weathers, and I may even agree with you.
Yeah. Yeah, and this is nothing really that recent. It's definitely been building up over the years. It's just this thing of where Gale, by the fandom, is kind of flattened into this slay queen, boss, diva, mama caricature to a lot of people. And, I am a Sydney fan. I am a Sydney person. If somebody asked me to pick one, it wouldn't be a problem for me. That being said, I'm not a Gale hater, neither, and this isn't driven by hate of Gale Weathers or Courtney Cox, of course. But this is something I've always felt, and what I've talked about, even on the forums way back in the day when we used to have these sort of discussions regularly. It's just kind of disappeared, and it's been replaced by something I can almost not even recognize. Because Gale Weathers really is a very complex character. She is quite morally gray, and she is, I would say, deliberately a contrast to Sydney, and that's partially her role in the franchise. But somehow that doesn't seem to register anymore. I feel like it's mimetic. People just see other people talking a certain way and they repeat it. It's difficult to diagnose why specifically, but that's something that's been quite annoying.
Here's the thing, like, I agree with you. I don't love the Slay Queen aspect of Gale on social media because I think that I'm a much bigger fan of Gale in general than you are. I love both Sydney and Gale. I think at this point in time, just based off of a multitude of factors, I would put myself in the Sydney camp over Gale Weathers. I think Scream 6 had a lot to do with that. And I guess both Scream
Sure, yeah.
6 and 7. I don't like when people flatten her and make her unserious because it's just kind of like the Jill and Mrs. Loomis of it too, because they do the same things with her. Like, this is the problem with, like, kind of like gay internet culture sometimes. Everything is so camp instead of like respecting like and honoring like what's so great about them. I do find her a bit more heroic than you do. For me, and like why I love Gale Weathers so much, I lived in a time before we had Scream 4. So my basis for Scream is 1 to 3. And so it's so perfect. Sydney has an arc from 1 to 3 that is, beautiful, fulfilling, triumphant, everything. But Gale's evolution from 1 to 3 is much different. Like, Sydney's is about like her overcoming and finding peace, whereas Gale's is about evolving from bad to good.
She's overcoming herself in a way. Yeah.
She's evolving from the quote bitch to a hero,
Right.
to a final girl. And I think that that's a very clear thing. In Scream 1 and like the first part of Scream 2, she's very cold. She's driven by everything in a professional way. And then, especially in Scream 2, it's the power that she has gotten from the murders. And I think she discounted the view of the murders, right? But then once like it starts affecting her, and she's no longer the person on the outside reporting, and she becomes the story. She experiences it in the same way that Sydney does, first with Randy's death, but then through her chase scene and losing Dewey, et cetera, et cetera. I think that softens her, and that's the Gale that we see in Scream 3. And I think in Scream 3, within the dialogue, we get so many instances about like looking into who Gale Weathers was. I mean, literally in Scream 3, she is confronting Jennifer and confronting that old version of herself. She has to face like the fact that Dewey, can verbalize her flaws. The lost lone little girl inside. She has a heart because she doesn't want people to see her as weak, but she's cruel and annoying. Like, she's all of those things, and that's what makes her so great. But by the end of Scream 3, and here's the thing, like the difference between Gale and like Scream 1 and the first half of Scream 2 versus 3, 4, and 5 is 1 and 2, she's there because she wants the story in an opportunistic way. In 3 and 4, she's there because she wants to help. She wants to solve the mystery. She wants to bring an end to this. You would probably argue that there is some opportunism still in there, but I think that like 3 is her most heroic. So that's like the basis for how I see Gale Weathers and why she is so special to me. She's never been a truly bad guy, but she represents an evolution from bad to good, which back in those days with the original trilogy was, something so special. So, Ivan, what are your thoughts?
So my thoughts are okay. So there's a thing about Gale that makes people almost default to the most charitable read of all of her intentions at all times. And this is almost wishful thinking because I don't think this is just so strongly supported by the source material. So the text and the subtext, which is something I love to say. But yeah, the text and the subtext, it's really not so clear cut. She's not, this good guy who's bitchy, she's not a bitchy heroine. She's truly morally gray. In the first one, look, she was correct. She was correct about Cotton and Sydney was wrong. But she was right for the wrong reasons, which doesn't really lend itself to being to be able to call her a morally correct person because she just so happened to be factually correct based off of something that she thought was going to propel her career, and she was correct. It absolutely did propel her career. And in the second one, we all saw her attitude there, and it wasn't until Randy dies where she starts to shift. And that's really interesting because until it hits her personally, she doesn't care. She doesn't see all those murder victims as really all of that different than just chess pieces in her game. And in 3, what's interesting about Dewey and why I think he will be missed in the franchise, he always was the truth teller about Gale, even though he loved her, even in 3 when she says, I wrote the definitive book about the Woodsboro murders, and he says, oh, I'm sure you'd love to write another one, and I'm And that's how I feel as well. She wants to solve the case in 3, and I feel in good faith. I don't think she was being evil there. I also do think there's always an underlying presence of opportunism. I do feel that way. There's this funny thing on the Screen Wiki, which is now terrible. I used to edit it like back in the day, not anymore, where on Gale's info box, there's like a thing that says personality traits. One of the things is opportunist in brackets formally. And I'm like, okay, formally. When did that happen? When did that specifically happen? When did she specifically stop being an opportunist? I don't think it's so clear. Not even in 3, which is Gale at her most heroic, absolutely. However, and I do feel like she cared, but is there an underlying element of wanting to get the story so that she can write another book, or that she could, in the future, is there always an element of, oh, I want to make this into a story. I want to turn this into a true crime series, whatever it may be. I do feel like that's present, and that's something that a lot of people, I'm almost the entirety of the fandom, I feel like overlooks, which is something really interesting.
She is correct about cotton wearing. I think this is like a defining trait of Gale, and possibly speaks to what you're saying. Is like, I agree with you to an extent that there is an opportunism about her. Like with 3, we still see it with the camera in her bag for Scream 3. I think, and by the time that the things start rolling, I don't think that it's as prominent that she's thinking about the story. I do think she's so caught up in it, and the Sydney and the Maureen of it all. In terms of the Maureen Prescott and Cotton Weary, she was correct. But like that, you said it right. She's right for the wrong reasons. And we have to reckon with that. Sydney has to reckon with that. But perhaps she goes about it in the wrong way. And I think this is a pattern with her. And this kind of speaks to what Dewey said about her to Jennifer, is that she has a good heart. But, I think that she gets so narrowly focused in a distant way, in a clinical way about the subject. And we see this repeated throughout in the series, most recently in the interview, where I would defend her in the interview. I think that, like, the way I see her, because I see myself in her, where the goal is for Ghostface to call in while they're on air. And, Sydney, if anything, you could look at from Gale's perspective that Sydney isn't going far enough to entice. And like Gale is really trying, really trying, really trying. And she uses Tatum as bait, and Sydney doesn't like that. I will defend Gale more than I probably should here, because I do see Sydney's perspective. But if the goal is to get the killer to call, like, she's doing that. But again, she's going about it in the wrong way. So I think this is like a defining, consistent character trait from before we meet her, right, in 1995 with Maureen Prescott through Scream 7, that she still hasn't been able to fully exercise from her moral character, if that makes sense.
It makes absolute sense, but I will also say seems a little bit unnecessary, and also, like Sydney says, dangerous. For what reason? Had it not been like the killers had already voiced that Tatum is a target. It's been made clear. So bringing that up on air, I don't understand even what that was. I was as shocked as Sydney was, really, especially because when you plant that seed out there, like Gale, more than anybody should know how this works. If you plant a story or a potential continuation of this, and you kind of make that spark that could turn into a fire, it doesn't need to be this killer. It could be some
Another
future
one.
killer. Oh yeah, well, Sydney's kids, just like Gail said, yeah, a killer could target her children. Yeah, why not? Like the people in the Scream universe, much like in our real universe, are crazy, and they will they will go for any angle. So I don't think Sydney was overreacting in the interview whatsoever, especially because it doesn't really help either. It doesn't. So it's not even a case of her being right for the wrong reasons. I think she was just wrong in doing that. I don't think it helped. I think it made for a very upsetting soundbite, just the possibility of this, because Sydney is now a mother and she has also young children. So the viewers would find this upsetting, the prospect of it. However, does that really help with the situation at hand? I don't think so. So yeah.
The thing that's interesting about Gale in Scream 7, and why I think that you're kind of right to question the motive of Gale Weathers and the morals of her here, and not only here, but I guess throughout the series. And like, she isn't like this evolved angel. I think, she is evolved, and she is an interesting character because she evolved from 1 to 3, and I think that that evolution is maintained from 3 to 4 to 5. 6 is a whole other bag of worms we'll get to, but like in Scream 7, what's interesting to me? Scream 7 shows how much she's changed and how much she hasn't changed.
Mm-hmm.
I think with Sydney, it's interesting. I think that with Gale Weathers, there is, especially like post Randy's death, I think there is like a special thing that she has for both Sydney and for Dewey, where she kind of lets her wall down and she actually does truly care about them, and she will speak to them and connect with them in human and warm ways. Your moment that you mentioned about the bookstore aside, the moment of jealousy, which I also love. By the way, I love that. I love that scene in the bookstore. But in Scream 7, and we see that side of her with Sydney. I mean, the first thing that they do is hug, right? And she saves Sydney and Mark, from Ghostface. But, and we see this repeated with Sydney. We see this rapport, we see this warmth, and we see this friendship with Sydney. Yet with everybody else, she is Ice Queen. Like, she is not even friendly and nice to Chad and Mindy. You know what I mean? She treats everyone else with, like, I don't want to say arrogance, but there is an ego about her, but there's a professional wall. It's almost like, this is maybe a poor example, but like Meryl Streep in The Devil Wears Prada, like that Ice Queen persona. That's how she treats, the twins. That's how she is to like other people in the town and the mental hospital. She is complete Ice Queen. So, and if we think about that, that's kind of who Gale Weathers has been to everybody, throughout the series, whether it be Jennifer. I mean, it took a long time for Jennifer to break her way in to Gale being nice to her. So, I think it's just interesting that this is who Gale still is in the modern day. And the interesting thing also is, I get the opportunism. Chad and Mindy are there with the camera over the body of Carl, right? I do think that Scream 7 really shows us that she does want to stop this. She does care. She may also want the story, but I think that she does want everyone to be safe, if that makes sense.
Right. Yeah. And also earlier, you said the word persona. So the Gale Weathers persona, and that's something I wanted to mention also. I do feel like she almost constantly reverts to the Gale Weathers persona, because I truly feel like she doesn't feel like there is anything to her besides that, besides her public image, the way people remember her, and even in 6, reverting to her old ways. I think that's also just tied into her version of herself in her head, where she has to be Gale Weathers TM trademark, and I think that's why she behaves that way. Yes, she is a lot warmer to Sydney. Look, so there's the very, very charitable read where she's her best friend in the world, and Sydney doesn't get it, and actually Sydney was wrong, and she needed to apologize to her. There's the middle road, and there's also a possible reading, a very cynical reading, where Gale is a very dark character, where she's just manipulative and fake, and she knows that Sydney is what she needs. Sydney is her, in a sense, because the Woodsboro murders are her. Ghostface is her, Stab is her, and all of those things are also Sydney. So she almost feels like she absolutely needs her, and she also gains validation through her association with her, and that's why she was also very excited to have her interview with her finally. And even just speaking of 7, at the end when she let Mindy and Chad take over for a minute, I almost feel like that was a moment of, and this is just my reading, my interpretation. That's how I see it. I almost feel like Gale was a little bit defeated after the interview didn't work out the way she did, and she almost like kind of gives up in a way, and she was like, okay, you can have it, whatever.
I don't think this was out of like heart and soul for Mindy, like, oh, I need to prop up, this young Gen Z reporter who could take over for me. That's not what she was doing. I think she was exhausted. I think she didn't care. And I guess like there is a definite, like, I'm being more charitable to her than you are in my reading. I see this more as like, ooh, I was so excited about doing this interview. It was going to be a win-win for both me and Sydney. I get to fulfill something I've wanted for a long time. This could be a huge, like, ace in the hole to catch the Sue wannabe. And then that got ruined by miscommunication, by what you would say is her overstepping and doing the wrong thing and randomly bringing up Tatum. I think that she was doing it strategically and it was executed poorly. I think at that point, she is so defeated. She's just like, it's like when you're really excited for something and you keep talking about it and you keep talking about it and then it lets you down and it's just like you're a shrug. You don't really care what happens now. And that's kind of what I feel like happens there. And I think that I think if anything, I don't think that Gale and Sydney are best friends. I think that is a fantasy that a lot of fans put out there. They have a very unique relationship, unlike anybody else in the world, but they aren't best friends. I think Gale was concerned that she did upset Sydney and that she hurt Sydney, and that's why she went to her. So I agree with you. Like, she was more focused on Sydney and kind of the fallout of everything. Maybe she felt guilty. Maybe she wanted to smooth things over. Maybe she was feeling like eggshells, in her stomach. I don't know. So I agree with you. It was not an act of charity that she gave that to Mindy. It was an act of like, I don't even give a fuck right now.
Okay, so there's a couple of things there. So first off, if it was her being disappointed over not having caught, the killer was caught, the killer was thwarted, killers. So if she was solely working from that angle for the interview, there was really no need for her to still be upset. The danger was over and Sydney won. And also, one thing that I was actually gagged when I first saw it, I was actually like, my mouth was like wide open. When she comes back after the finale, when Gale comes back and the first thing she says is, thanks for ditching me. I was like, what? After, not even, are you okay? Nothing. Oh, thank you. Thanks a lot for ditching me. I'm like, what? Excuse me? And followed immediately by an apology from Sydney, which was great. Thematically, it's bizarre for her to do, especially the thing about New York. I don't even think even Gale truly on any level thinks that Sydney should have been in New York. I don't think she feels that way. I think that it just goes to show that Jessica did actually get in her head.
Absolutely, yes.
Absolutely, yeah. But the fact that Gale comes in that way and that Sydney feels the need to apologize, I feel like Gale also in that moment kind of, if I had to imagine, kind of realize, though, maybe what I'm doing right now is a little bit too much. Maybe I should lay off a little bit. And that's why she was kind of low energy after that point, and she didn't feel like being the face of the story anymore. But that was so bizarre. Nobody talks about it, that she came in like that.
So for the record, I did address this in my Gale episode with, when I had Gale Week, I addressed that was the first thing she said to her.
Well, you did, but most people did.
I know. It's like everything else. But,
Yeah.
with that line, I almost think, you're going to disagree because, again, I'm reading it charitably. I'm the good cop, you're the bad cop, with
Yeah.
Gale Weathers. I see it more as Gale just trying to break the ice because obviously, everything is
She
settled.
seemed genuinely upset. Sorry. To me, she seems genuinely upset.
Well, I think that she says that just to break the ice, and then I think she's going to their fight and their disagreement and their argument. Like, seriously, what was that about? Like, coming on both sides. Like, seriously, come on. I think that there was. I was leading up to an apology, but that's my interpretation. But Dewey said it himself. Like, Gale is selfish, and I will say, Gale repeatedly denies Sydney this. Sydney somewhat broaches this a couple of times that she should have been there for her, and that just goes to show how moral and righteous Sydney is, and Gale
Right.
perhaps isn't about New York.
Absolutely. And also, just to zero in on that interview, by the way, that interview scene is my favorite scene from Seven. It may even be my top 5 scene from the franchise,
Love it.
including all of the openings, all the kills. Top 5, I would say. But I also feel the thing that Sydney says about essentially the insinuation that Gale has been a fake friend and that she's somebody that Sydney can trust. That's been a long time coming. I don't think that's something recent.
It hits deep because we've seen the patterns and we've seen like the initiating trauma with Maureen Prescott and like everything that happened when she was a teenager and everything that's built on. There's always been some shakiness. I think at the end of the day, Sydney does at the end when she says that she means it, and I think that she can probably trust Gale, and that's the brilliance of that scene. It hits so hard because there is a little seed of doubt, despite their beautiful relationship that we see, in Act 2 of Scream 7. Them teaming up and everything that they go through in Scream 5 with Dewey, and it's just like despite all of that, there are seeds of doubt that, no matter what, it's really hard to fully get rid of whenever you have such intense things that happen to you, like Sydney has, and Gail was a key player in it.
Right. And look, okay, so I want to just circle back to four a little bit. So I mentioned the bookstore scene, and what I wanted to also just say about that is, so I did not live with the trilogy for a very long time. I watched the trilogy for the first time only a couple of months before four came out. And I think the thing about four that surprised me the most, that I was kind of taken aback with, not even in a negative way, I found it interesting, is just, so first off, Gale writing the fictional stat books, that was very bizarre. And what was more interesting is Sydney's almost, because Sydney in four is, she's almost like Mother Teresa. She's almost like a saintly floating figure above the entire film. She's almost like this mythical folk hero and a perfect person, which I find really interesting about four. But she forgives her almost immediately for probably some of the weirdest things I've ever heard of, which is writing fictional books based on murders that were real and happened to people you know and also yourself, so that you were involved with. And Sydney Prescott, whose book signing you showed up to, but Sydney was so gracious in that moment. And even though Gail's bitterness, honestly, she was so bitter at the beginning of four, Sydney pretended not to see it. And I feel like that's, so I will never say something like, oh, I don't like Gail, I hate Gail, because Gail is such an integral part of Scream's DNA, and it's stuff like that. So even more than the villains, really, even more than the killers, it's so that truly that's not her sole purpose, her sole point of existence, but so that Sydney could have a contrast, a moral contrast. And I feel like it's at times quite stark. Just to talk about four a little more, as I love to do. So everybody knows four was a remake of Scream, and each and every character had this kind of updated, slightly distilled in its most pure essence, if you will, version of themselves in the remake. So the characters from the original did I mean. So, and Gail had hers also, obviously, Rebecca, who was a very cruel, very almost comically twisted person.
Yes.
And this was Gale in a way, just slightly more exaggerated for satire, but there's truth in satire. So that's another thing that's something kind of almost completely lost to people. Scary movie, Gale Hailstorm. She films a girl getting murdered and is very nonchalant about it. So the persona of Gale Weathers in pop culture was something that is different from what we have now. And I wonder what specific thing it was that kind of shifted it and kind of just dropped the whole thing, and where the conversation was lost.
And I love that you bring up Rebecca. That's an excellent point because Rebecca seems so meaner than Gale, right? Even side by side with Gale in Scream 1. But you're right. If you make it proportional, like to 2011 language from 1996, that is kind of who Gale was and how she acted and her morals, right? But we're seeing in Scream
Yeah.
4 the evolved version of Gale. And someone once asked me, like, how do you square the circle of, Gale at the end of Scream 3, she is the hero. She's evolved from 1 to 2 to 3. So she goes from bad to good. And she says, I'm done doing stories that way. I don't think that her writing the books about Stab is so bad if she had Sydney's permission. The thing about Scream 4 and her renewed interest, and this is this ties into Scream 6. In Scream 4, people say Scream 6 Gale in terms of her going back and writing the book when she said she wouldn't. That's who Gale is in every single iteration of Scream. And I don't really see it that way. And I don't see it that way in Scream 4. In Scream 4, again, she wants to be included. I would qualify it. She wants to maybe perhaps report on what's going on in a better perhaps more ethical way. But I think it's more so she wants to be included and help solve what's going on. Whenever she knows the killer's at the Stabathon for sure, and she interacts with the killer with him taking down the cameras, she calls Dewey for help. She doesn't just go back in and try to get the scoop before he arrives, because if you think about it from Gale's perspective, if the cops get there, the killer may run away, or you know what I mean?
Well, she may also die, but yeah.
Right. But we're talking about Gale Weathers here. Come on.
Yeah, right.
So, but I think that the moral line is clear. And I do think like there is such a stepping stone from 1 to 2, 2 to 3, 3 to 4, 4 to 5. It's the same woman, and she just changes a little bit each time. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I didn't have a problem with her in 5. I do not like 5. I do not. I
Breaking news.
I do not like 5, but yeah, I didn't have a problem with her changing her mind. I thought that was something interesting and a really cool evolution. It would make sense. Nobody's the same for 10 years between 3 and 4, and 10 years between 4 and 5. So, people can change. Some people took umbrage with that. I didn't, even though I'm so negative about 5. That's not one thing that I was really concerned about. The thing is that I was completely shattered with 6, and in probably the worst possible way that if I had to make an idea or write something that could be the worst possible continuation of that would be Scream 6. I don't think I could come up with something worse. So, but it is what it is. This is not a Scream 6 episode, but yeah.
Can I just jump in about Scream 5? And like the fact that I think it is interesting, and I know that we hate Guy and Jamie, okay?
We do.
We do, okay? But, I think it's interesting that they had her doing a talk show or like a morning show rather than being the field reporter searching out whatever, I think that was a specific thing. I think that actually fits Gale. Being the corporatized, like in vanity ego thing of something like that fits the Gale of Scream 3 and 4. In terms of her evolution. And that's why I kind of gave that a thumbs up. But what they do with her in 6 is so offensive. And like, this is the thing, like the decision to write the book on Sam and kind of really paint her in this negative light. It's confounding. It completely ignores that delicate evolution from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 to 5 that we've been talking about. And that's why we all despise Scream 6. It's not because, we can go into why we despise Scream 6, but for me, this is one of these central things of what makes me just tick about Scream 6 is Gale Weathers. And like that first scene, she's not doing the talk show thing now. She's back in the field reporting, and she's, just acting out of character. She's acting literally like the Gale of Scream 2. It's almost like they were trying to erase her and erase everything that Wes built with her. Because I think Wes actually really liked the character. I think he
yeah, he loved Gale. I think so. Yeah.
Scream 6 shows Gale at her most morally reprehensible. I actually think that Gale Weathers in Scream 6 is worse morally than she is even in Scream 1 and 2.
Yeah, look, okay, so if they were gonna go in that direction with 6, so actually, a tiger doesn't change its stripes, so, it could have almost been like, modern horror loves doing allegories for addiction. Gale almost falls back on this thing as almost like an addict would, where she, even though she says that she's gonna quit and she's gonna stop, she just has to keep doing it again and again. And had she been like, would have been a little bit out there, it wouldn't have been respectful to the character anyways. But what 6 ends up being is just a humiliation ritual for Gale. She kind of just turns into, I'm sorry, a complete loser. She's such a loser in 6.
The
way
writing
she
makes her that way.
Yeah, it's not Courtney's fault, but she grovels to these new characters after fucking Tara Carpenter, whoever the fuck that is. You think you get to punch Gale Weathers? Excuse me, honey, no. Like that's reserved for one person only. And that hasn't been the case for her for a very long time either. So,
Can we just how insane it is that Tara punches a 60-year-old woman.
Absolutely.
It's completely insane. And just, and out of the blue, it's not like Gale was even like, physically intimidating. She was just doing her job. Like, and it,
She wasn't even in their face.
no,
That's
like,
crazy.
it's completely insane. And it speaks to like the whole nihilistic vibe of the Carpenter sisters and just the way that, like, especially Sam, they're talking, Sam Carpenter is the face of morally gray evil of the main character protagonists, But, you're right. And also, not only does she grovel towards the characters, the thing that makes it so frustrating is if they really wanted to go down this rabbit hole of like Gale went back on her word and she's really struggling with the trauma of losing Dewey and she doesn't have Sydney and she's isolated and she's, whatever. If they wanted to do that storyline, they could have built it up and actually written a part for her. But even whenever we do get Gale, and this is what makes me so frustrated too, is they treat her like an exposition dump. They give her the exposition dump about Sydney. They give her the probing question about where's your mother and all of this. Like, it's just so fucking insulting. She finds the shrine off screen. Again, Gen X is doing the work off screen so Gen Z can play in their apartment. Fuck you. Like, it just, Scream 6 is so fucking insulting. I can't even with Scream 6. And what they do with her and the way that they erase the development, from 1 to 5 is completely disastrous. And again, like, the Gale Weathers we meet in like the at the police station, I think that is like the most morally reprehensible version of Gale. It's inexplicable, to go from Scream 5 Gale to Scream 6 Gale. And I think what Scream 7 Gale does in the interview scene in particular is we see both sides. We're starting to see possibly how the Scream 6, like, Gale that published the book about Sam still exists by her doing that to Sydney, by her bringing up Tatum, when Sydney feels uncomfortable. I think that's what Kevin was trying to do. He was trying to make a bridge where you can't make a bridge. So what are your
Right.
thoughts?
Yeah, I think he he had his hands full there, just trying to make sense of 6 and just coming off of that. But I feel like it just even beyond 6, I don't think that particular scene is so concerned about 6. It's just everything that transpired before. So either way, I feel like, I mean, like I said, it's one of my favorite scenes. But the thing with Gale, yeah, like you said, and it's just really disheartening to see a character be treated like that. I think actually what that 6 was so horrendous that it just made me think of 5 even worse, and I was never super hot about 5. I think what that was about with Gale in 5, I just don't think they wanted to deal with another stab movie. I mean, Radio Silence and Guy and James. So they just kind of, that was like a shorthand. Oh, Gale isn't going to write another one because so that we don't have to do stab anymore in the future. And then they were like, oh, well, she could still write it, but that doesn't need to be a movie, I guess. So I think that's what that was. And we can try to make sense of it.
But we
however
can't.
we'd
That's the
like.
thing. We
We
can't make
can
sense
because
of it.
there's nothing to make sense of. Yeah.
Radio Silence and Guy and Jamie, they can pretend like they were all #4West and that Scream 5, they really cared, blah, 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 blah,
No.
blah. But for me, I think that the only thing that mattered to them, and this shows in how they treated the core 4 and how they treated Gale, that they only cared about making their mark on Scream. They forced this idea of the core 4 into our faces. Meanwhile, giving Gale Weathers reheated nachos of a storyline, and not only that, reheated dialogue, almost the same exact dialogue from Scream 2 with her in Scream 6. They give her a good scene, a really good scene. Other than that, like, they do not give a shit about her. They wanted to push them and their legacy and these characters, and they were trying to make it as much as they possibly could that the core 4 would be equal to the trio. And guess what? You failed. And thank you, Kevin, for fucking cleaning up their goddamn mess in Scream 7. Thank you. Do you have any final thoughts about Gale Weathers and her morality? I have one final point, but I'm going to toss it over to you first.
Yeah, look, I feel like she really is a very complex character. Gale Weathers, you are such a complex character, and I do feel like she is a lost and lonely little girl inside in a way. So I don't find her reprehensible as a person. I just find her morality a lot more complex than most people would think or talk about. I feel like there is a certain darkness to this character that has been unexplored by the fandom mostly. I remember during the 4 era, people theorizing that Gale was going to be a future Ghostface so that she could have something more to write about and have more material, which was such a stupid idea. Always, like, that kind of stuff is so dumb. But that doesn't mean that she is incredibly pure of heart. She's no murderer. She's not a violent person. She's not evil in any degree, but is she dark? More than complicated. Neither black or white. Some people, a lot of the fandom just sees her as white, if you will. She's not so dark, but I feel like she is gray. So gray is the combination of those two colors. So calling her morally gray obviously suits her just fine. And I'm really interested to see how she's gonna advance in future films and where that's gonna go. Because we've seen Scream film before this one where she just completely goes against what she says or implies at the end of the previous film. So I'm really interested in what the relationship between her and Sydney is gonna be like.
Well, I agree that she is complex, and I think that's what makes her so great. Whereas Sydney, she's complex, but she is such a hero and she's such a good person, in the greatest sense of the word. Whereas Gale, you hit the nail on the head where, Sydney and Gale exist as a contrast, and that's why the franchise doesn't feel overstuffed by them. They each have their own place, and each of them funnel the franchise with strength and artistic prowess. Versus, you have Sam and Tara and Chad and Mindy, and they're all the same person with the same personality, except Sam wants to kill people, which is great, right? Let's talk about morality. But the last thing I'll say is the thing about Gale is too. I want to just highlight. I actually think people are harsh on her, and I think it comes out in her relationship with Dewey. And this is kind of like where I want to end, because you brought up Dewey earlier. Dewey is so important to Gale, and he held her accountable. Like, he held her extremely accountable in Scream 2 for writing the book and how much he was hurt by her, right? And how she blatantly just didn't really care. She thought it was funny. She thought his little outburst was a joke, and like she laughed at him. But I will say this. I think that there's a pattern with the Dewey and Gale relationship where, because of her problems elsewhere, she gets labeled the bitch, and Dewey's so likable and elsewhere. He gets seen as the good guy and she gets seen as the bad guy. And I would argue, that most of the problems in their marriage and in their relationship, I actually think that Gale is usually in the right, and Dewey can sometimes be frustrating and a man-child to her within their marriage. I think that this is something we see over and over again with them, where the film codes us to empathize with Dewey because Gale is coded as the bitch. But I think, in reality, one thing, and I think it's the most prominent with like the fallout of their marriage and him just kind of abandoning her in the middle of the night without even telling her that he was leaving. She often does the right thing in the marriage, and Dewey often sometimes does the wrong thing.
I feel like Dewey is almost, to me anyways, an angelic figure, similar to Sydney. I think Sydney and Dewey were kind of mirror images in certain ways, but I can see how he was quite childish. That's his personality trait of his. I see where you're coming from. And one thing I wanted to actually end this on, and you bring that up, so her being a bitch, one thing so that is really important and impressive. So I have no problem being a huge fan of or standing problematic characters or bitchy female characters or even bad, because I find these archetypes very fascinating. I'm the number one Jessica Bowden fan ever. So,
We love that.
we love that. So it's not that I have a problem with Gale on that level. It's just everything that I said. I think it's just what gets me is the lack of conversation around it and lack of acknowledgement. It makes me frustrated, and it makes me sometimes feel like, is Gale being approached directly? Is there something that people are missing? Does this need to be like more on the nose or something? I don't know. But what I will say is Gale Weathers surviving that first movie, a character who was coded as just a huge bitch, really. That was kind of unprecedented, this type of character surviving this archetype. And that was kind of revolutionary, and what she represents is revolutionary. And also, just because somebody is a bitch or even mean or bad or really mean, even though they may have some redeeming qualities, that's not something a slasher film would have concerned itself with. They would have just killed her in any 80s movie ever, And I feel like she represents something that is really important in horror, and she is a revolutionary character in a way.
I love Gale. I really do love her. But I would agree with you that just like everything, social media just flattens things. There's a part of me that does see her and it's like, oh yeah, Slay Queen, but that's not really how I view her or how I think she should be talked about or honored. It's her complexity is what gives her strength. And I love that you acknowledge like the time period in which that Gale Weathers came from and the fact that she did survive. Like that's so important. And I think
She was a really important character moving forward. Yeah.
she's a monumental character. She is going to be, in the history books, knock on wood, she'll probably be the person who has been in every single Scream film. That's going to be a huge accomplishment.
Also, may I just end this on a questionnaire for the audience? So, me and Ryan, we were talking earlier about whether Gail had written a book about the Scream 4. Everybody, let Ryan know, what was your takeaway in 5 and 6? So, did you feel like Gail wrote a book about Scream 4? I'm so interested in this because I feel like she didn't. I feel like it's implied that she didn't for whatever reason. I don't think the thing of Jill wanting fame, so that's the reason why she didn't write. I don't think that really holds up because Jill wanted profit and fame while she was alive, not while she was dead. But everybody just sound off on this and let Ryan know.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the next segment of this Courteney Cox birthday episode. So, June 15th is Courteney Cox's birthday. This is the closest episode to her birthday. And we're celebrating Gale. We're celebrating Courteney. I would love to talk about Courteney Cox's TV shows and the characters she's played on TV. And they kind of align with Scream. And I've watched them and I've found them to be so important to my Scream story in a way that, I just assume everybody has. But if you haven't watched these shows and you want more Courteney Cox, you should check them out. But so today we are going to be talking about the 4 shows that Courteney Cox has starred in over her career. They are Friends, which 1994 to 2004, Dirt, which was 2007 to 2008, Cougar Town, which was 2009 to 2015, and Shining Vale, which was 2022 to 2023. And joining me to discuss Courteney Cox's television career is my friend Brendon O'Rourke. Hey, Brendon.
Hi, Ryan. I'm so excited to be here talking about my favorite actor of all time, Courteney Cox.
Whom you've met twice.
I
Why don't
have.
you give it a little refresh if you want to, just for her birthday?
Sure. So I met Courtney. It was actually the fall after Scream 5 came out. About 3 months before that, I told my husband, I said, I want to meet Courteney Cox before I die. How do you think we can make that happen? He goes, I don't know. And then a couple months later, I saw that there was a pop-up shop here in New York City for her line of home care products, Home Court. And I wrote them and I said, well, will Courtney be there? And they said, yes, she will be here. So I was like, I'm going to go to this. So it was like kind of a pop-up shop. There was a bunch of influencers there and I was there and it was a cocktail reception and it couldn't have been a more perfect setting. And I got to go up to her. We talked for a couple minutes, took a picture together, and it was everything I could have hoped an interaction or a, meeting with her would be. She was absolutely lovely, incredible, funny, just a wonderful person. And it was a dream come true.
Well, that's so cool. And I am jealous. Also, I love Home Court. So I think it's just cool that you got to go to one of the first events and like actually meet her because she hasn't been at all of the events. So you really lucked out there.
I for sure did. So I think it was fate, like law of attraction. I don't know what was going on, but it was incredible.
Well, so Brendon, I am excited to talk about her TV shows because I love her TV shows. I still watch them on the regular. Like they're a huge part of my life. They're some of my favorite shows and they really do kind of accompany each of the Scream movies. Like if you think about it, Friends is in the timeline of the original trilogy. Cougar Town is in the timeline of Scream 4 and Shining Vale was in the timeline of, 5 and 6. Do you have any musings just in general about Courteney Cox and the TV shows that she starred in before we go into the specifics?
I mean, they're all very there's some similarities with some of them, but they're all kind of different. And I think they each showcase kind of different elements of her talent. Like you just mentioned, you still watch them in your rotation. I was like, oh, you know what? I actually do too. Right now, I'm watching. It had been a couple years since I had watched Cougar Town, so I started watching Cougar Town again. And Friends is always on rotation for me. I'll throw on an episode of that before bed quite often. And I love each of these shows. They're great characters she gets to play. I'm excited to dive in and talk about it.
Cool. Well, let's start with Friends. It's the one that everyone is probably most familiar with and like knows her from. And honestly, like it's funny because like the other shows, she is the main character. She's the lead and everyone else is kind of under her. Here she is part of an ensemble. So what are your thoughts on Friends as a show overall? overall?
Friends is probably the best sitcom of all time. I think a lot of people will say it's the ultimate best sitcom in TV history. I don't think there's been another great sitcom really since Friends. And Courtney is incredible in this show. The writing of this show and then the chemistry between all the actors, you can really see it. And then in particular, Courtney, her comic timing is unbelievable in this show. It's comedy is hard. It is not easy. And she does it so effortlessly and flawlessly that you might be fooled and think it's easy. But her performance is Monica's amazing. And we get to see a really big journey with her throughout the 10 seasons.
I love Friends. I would say it's my number one favorite comedy show of all time. It's something that like I know it so well, yet it feels so effortless to watch, and I always enjoy watching it. I always laugh like out loud. I think all six of the characters are pretty awesome. Monica is a favorite of mine. I don't know if she's my number one favorite on Friends, but I love her. I love her quirky, things about her personality, like her obsession with cleaning and, her career as a chef and kind of like her sense of humor and like how OCD she is. I think it's so great. And I think that Courtney, it's funny because like the first half of the Friends, I feel like they have very like, I would say the plot lines are deeper. And then in the second half, they become more popularized, if that makes sense, more corporatized. I don't know. Both have their charm. I love both, the deeper, more personal storylines in the first half and then the broader comedy of the second half. But I love Friends so much. And, like I said, it's a part of my life in a true, like kind of permanent way. It makes me laugh. It makes me feel good. And Monica is a wonderful character. So I think it also just benefits from being extremely rewatchable. I will defend it no matter what. Like it really bothers me when people use like today's standards of like, political correctness against Friends, because I think it was just an awesome show in the time that it happened. And that I think that it should continue to be, seen as the achievement that it is. So
Without a doubt. I mean, I grew up in the time when I was in like high school and I grew up as Friends was airing, and it was such a like pop culture moment. Everyone was watching it, and it is so rewatchable today. And any kind of discourse about some, things age. Things are different today than they were 20, 30 years ago. So any criticism on that is, I think, unfounded. And I think you can tell because people still are watching this show today. New people are discovering it. Courtney has fans that are so young, like in their early 20s, and love Friends. So I think that really shows how this stands like the test of time.
yeah. And Courtney, it really makes me sad because she was the only person who wasn't nominated for an Emmy of the six Friends for acting whenever it was going on. And she had the material, she had the opportunity, and they just didn't give it to her for some reason. I think you could have nominated her a lot in the first half. There was a lot of good storylines. She has some like standalone episodes in the first season, and like you have the Richards storyline, and like then of course the Chandler storyline in season 5. All of those were really missed opportunities in my opinion. So
Huge missed opportunities because especially the seasons where her and Chandler were hiding their relationship and then the relationship becomes public. Courtney is unbelievable in those seasons. The fact that she did not get a nomination is insane because I feel like that season with Chandler and Monica and everyone discovering that really showcases in particular Courtney and also Matthew Perry, and
Mhm.
she should have for sure been nominated. And Courtney also has some in later seasons, there's some dramatic turns with Monica where you find out that she can't have her children on her own. And that's like a heartbreaking, that shows like a very sad moment. And Courtney does it so well. And then with the whole adoption, there's plenty of times where she could have been nominated for an Emmy. And I think it's ridiculous that it hasn't happened.
So let's move on now to the next show, which I'm sure this is probably the one that people have probably seen the least of, just because it came out in a time that's kind of more obscure. But she was on a show called Dirt. It was on FX. It was a drama about a woman who runs like a tabloid magazine, and Courtney Cox played the main character. Her name was Lucy Spiller, and she was this cutthroat, kind of fierce, bitchy, almost like in the vein of Gale Weathers. This could have been like the post Scream 3 version of Gale Weathers in some respects. She's very bold, the classic kind of bitch in the way that like Gale Scream 2 was. So what are your thoughts on Dirt?
So Dirt was fun. When Dirt was announced and Dirt came out, I was so excited. So they had this I was living in California at the time. They had this like billboard of like Courtney looking over the Sunset Strip. It was very LA, very Hollywood, and she is great in this. And it is definitely the character that she's done most similar to Gale Weathers. Courtney's performance is excellent. I think what the show I rewatched it about 2 years ago after haven't seen it, haven't watched it since it first aired. And I think where the show doesn't excel as well is the supporting characters I find are not as interesting or exciting to watch. And then when it came back in season two, it was a whole different tone. So season one was very kind of dark, heavy drama, dealing with serious themes. And then they kind of brought the show back and reworked it. And it was a little more comical, maybe a little more campy, more episodical. And I actually prefer the second season over the first. I also find it to be more rewatchable if you go back and watch it. And it's a shame it didn't last longer. I believe a writer's strike was happening during season two. And so the season got cut short and, it didn't come back. Writer's strike strikes again.
Brendon and I actually, we overlap on our opinions about most things. Like, it's funny, if I go to log something on Letterboxd, so 3.5 out of 5, I see that Brendon has already logged it with that exact score. So it's almost like, 90% of the time we overlap. This is one area where I think we don't. So I actually prefer season one. I did like the darkness. She had a really incredible character arc, a really challenging character arc in season one. It's about her past and her family and about like it comes in the form of her sexuality. And she has this stalker that's like haunting her through season one and like breaking into her house. And there's a nice reveal there. It's almost like a Scream reveal. You don't know who the stalker is and then it gets revealed. But there are also like some thriller aspects to Dirt season one, which I liked. There's a big episode where there's a shooter in the building and she kind of is like the person who's kind of facing off against the shooter. It's very suspenseful and she has blood all over her. It looks like, a Scream movie in a way. And in fact, season one ends with her character being attacked and being stabbed and kind of left for dead, which again, very Scream coded. But there's some really heavy dramatic stuff that she has to do in this. Probably the most dramatic of these earlier shows before Shining Vale, at least. The thing about Dirt season one is that it's very trashy. That's how most people would have described it. There's a lot of nudity. The tone can sometimes be a bit much. It's very much of its time. Season two was the opposite of that. It got away from being trashy, but for me, it kind of lost something. It was a little drier than season one, but the problem is it's so incomplete. We only got 7 episodes instead of the full 15. But yeah, I love Dirt. It's very nostalgic for me. I haven't watched it in a while, but I would maybe someday I'd like to sit down and have a proper rewatch. But I love her dramatic work in Dirt. So
You brought up some really great points, and I forgot kind of how the finale ends with a very Scream kind of like, thing with her getting stabbed and everything. But she's excellent in it. I think Courtney can do anything. So
yeah. All right. Well, so let's move on now to Cougar Town, which is such a big thing in my life. So, Brendon, what did you think of Cougar Town?
I loved Cougar Town. I watched it when it aired. I was so excited to see Courtney lead another show again. It's very funny. The name doesn't. It's funny because when the show first came out, it was really marketed as like Courtney's like she's 40, she's going out with younger men. The show's called Cougar Town. You have a lot of like, especially in the first like 6 to 8 episodes. It was actually for network television. I rewatched the first 8 episodes like this last week, and it was pretty racy. And the jokes are they're more like scandalous than that I remembered, and also than I would think that ABC would allow for a network TV. It's very funny. I was laughing out loud many times. The supporting cast on this show is great. The characters are well defined. The guy who wrote this show has done a lot of very successful character driven comedies, and it's an excellent show. Courtney's excellent in it. It's truly funny. And she gets to lead the show.
Well, so, I remember this time so vividly. This was such a great time in my life whenever Cougar Town came out. I watched it literally from the very first episode every single week, and it was something I did with my sister, and it was just like a family thing. It was in the same way that I talk about Abby and I kind of bonding over Scream, like the original trilogy growing up. It was the same thing with Cougar Town. It was a weekly check-in, and it was like right around the time that Scream 4 was being, written, being filmed, and then being released the first 2 seasons. And it was just a great time to be a Courteney Cox fan. It's weird because the show got mixed reception at first, and I think it was unfair to what you just said. Like it was actually pretty bold in a lot of things that it was doing. And I would actually argue that a lot of those earlier episodes, I don't think that they would be judged as harshly today. Maybe they would. I don't know. But I think the racy aspect and how daring they were with the comedy, that would be criticized, right? But I think the concept of like this older woman who is starting to experiment with her sexuality, trying to rebuild herself, that would be seen as feminist and cool. So I love those early episodes. I will defend them. I don't think that they're cringe or the concept is trashy. But then the show kind of takes this other route where it becomes like about the friend group, and she's kind of the leader of it. And it comes in the payoff of the will they won't they with her neighbor, who's played by Josh Hopkins, who's one of like my top two crushes of all time. I love that guy. But no, so in terms of Courtney, this is going to be controversial to say, but I actually think that this is a much deeper character than Monica in terms of like being dynamic. She's given so much opportunity and she gets to deliver in so many different ways on every moment. The energy she brings to Scream 4 is the energy that fuels basically every episode, especially of the first couple of seasons. She gets to be a mom, she gets to be divorced, she gets to be single, she gets to, have problems with her job, she gets to have best friend problems, she gets to have a will they won't they with her neighbor, and then a relationship with him and all of the problems that come there. So there's just so much for her to do. I love it. And I think that it's a more acquired taste in terms of the humor. It's more ironic, more quirkier in the comedy, but I find it hilarious. It's almost similar to Friends in a way where it just brings me a lot of comfort and warmth. I actually watched it during the pandemic during a rough time, and also another thing is she gets a lot of self-deprecating humor in this, which makes her extremely relatable. And I don't know, Brendon, I don't know if you remember at this time, but like she was nominated for the Golden Globe. It was the first
Yep.
time she got like a big major nomination, and several people were predicting her to win. And I find that to be such a missed opportunity. I feel like this is the performance she should have won for, especially since she was ignored for Friends for so long.
For sure. And the fact that she didn't get an Emmy nomination that year, again, also ridiculous. I remember when she was nominated for Golden Globe. I remember what she was wearing. Very pretty earrings. I
Yeah.
remember it distinctly. So I was thrilled for her. Courtney anchors this show. It's not easy to lead a show, and she does it again effortlessly each time.
Well, and the thing is too, like about that is like I personally think that she gave one of the greatest performances ever in the history of comedy in season 1, and I would even extend that to season 2. There's no reason that she shouldn't have won that the Emmy for this, and I think there were a lot of politics at play, and I think Friends is almost weird. Like people love to embrace Lisa Kudrow because she's seen as a classier, more traditional actor, whereas Courtney, I guess, is maybe more defined by like her sex appeal or her beauty. I don't know, but I think that was held against her, and the nature of the show being called Cougar Town and like the bias there. It's just it wasn't graded fairly for the merit, in my opinion. So
I agree. That first season is hilarious. If you haven't watched it, watch it. It's on Hulu, Disney Plus. It's a fun, like, comfort watch. Check it out again or watch it if you haven't seen it.
And I have to say I'm actually kind of low key friends with Krista Miller, who plays Ellie, she's on a show with Harrison Ford now. God, I don't know what The Shrinking. I wrote an article about Cougar Town and I praised her. Back whenever I was like doing Oscar blogging, I wrote this for the TV side, and she reached out to me and she followed me and we used to chat. It was just she really appreciated what I had to say about her.
She's a great actress.
Yeah. Well, let's move on now to Shining Vale. And now this has been very well documented within the history of the podcast because it was on whenever the podcast was ongoing, and we got Scream 5 and then Shining Vale came out like a month or so afterwards. And it's a horror comedy and it's meta. It's kind of like using old horror movies to kind of tell its plot. But it also stars Courteney Cox and she's a writer. So I mean, there's a lot of overlap between Scream and Shining Vale. So what are your thoughts on Shining Vale?
I absolutely love this show. This show is so underrated. It's hilarious. It's amazing for horror fans. If you're a horror fan, this show is so good. There's like so many references, Easter eggs, homages to horror films through it, like classic horror films, modern horror films. Courtney is incredible. The acting range and the material she is given in this show is challenging, and she hits it out of the park. Like, you're getting dramatic work. It's a half-hour comedy, but there are definitely some like heavy drama like scenes and work, and she is amazing in this. Like, I find her performance to be extremely impressive.
Yeah.
a career best, maybe. It's so good. I just think what she does with this role and this character is unbelievable, and I love this show.
And for being so similar to Gale, and even being comedic like Monica and Jules from Cougar Town, it's still very uniquely Pat. So for me, I agree with Brendon. I love it. I think season 1 is like those 8 episodes. That's a flawless season of television for me. I adore that. I even Jeff Astroff, the creator of Shining Vale, he's been on the podcast a couple of times, and like I think he had such a great vision for the first season. And I think this is the biggest opportunity she's had, even including Dirt and including Dewey's death, to show dramatics, to show her dramatic side. She gets to actually act as Jack Nicholson in the finale, and it's really scary. It's really dark. I didn't think Courteney Cox could go to this place, but yeah, it's a very layered show. I would say it's a highbrow kind of comedy. It's very smart. It's intelligent. It's literary. I love the setting. I have a deep connection with this show and with her character. Season 2, I think, kind of went off the rails by the end. Like, I didn't love the last 2 episodes or the finale or the fact that the show ended without real resolution. But I liked season 2 had a great start, and so that's kind of where I stand with Shining Vale. So
I loved both seasons. I think season 2 is still excellent. We have a lot of like Rosemary's Baby, kind of a Rosemary's Baby story going on. And I think the last 2 episodes of both seasons, Courtney is unbelievable. If you watch this show, watch the last 2 episodes of each one in one setting, because they really kind of take off. And Courtney, just her acting is incredible in both seasons. And she flips from laugh out loud comedy to heavy dark dramatics and is unbelievable. Again, another show. She should have been nominated for an Emmy. The show should have continued. If it wasn't on Stars, more people would have watched it. So I blame Stars. And also there was another writer's strike and an actor's strike where they couldn't do any promotion. So I will tell your viewers, if you have not watched this show is on HBO now. And you need to, if you're a horror fan, if you're a Courtney fan, which if you're listening to this podcast, I'm sure you are, you need to watch it while it's on HBO, because with streamers, it could go away at any time. So if you have not seen this show, I implore you, go watch it.
I mean, it's like such a well-packaged show, even outside of her. I mean, she is the main attraction, but like the setting's great. The other actors are great. You have Greg Kinnear, Mara Sorvino, Gus Byrne, who plays her daughter. So many great things about Shining Vale. And again, it's just the writing is just so rich. Beautiful show. I miss it. And honestly, there is no reason that it shouldn't have continued. This should have been a 7-season show that went through all these new Scream movies. And I have so much regret that it didn't end up that way. Anyways, well, Brendon, let's do it. So we're going to now rank her performances and the shows themselves. So from best to worst, or our preference to our least preference. So let's start with her performance. So how would you rank these 4 shows for her acting or her character?
All right. So on her performance, I'm going from best to least best. At the top is Shining Vale. I think the material she's given is unbelievable. I think the range she shows is something you've never seen Courtney do before. Was so impressed with her. Excellent 10s across the board. That's the top. The next 2 are really close, because I know which way Ryan's going to go, but I think I'm going to have to go. The next one is going to be Monica. And maybe it's the nostalgia in me. Maybe it's because I grew up watching this show. I do put Monica just because her timing is so good. She has some serious stuff in here too. Then I go Jules on Cougar Town. They're really neck and neck, because there's definitely a case for putting Jules above, because she does lead the show. She is the lead. She's in so much of that show. So I put her third, and then the last is going to be Lucy Spiller in Dirt.
The thing is, I think most people would probably agree with you in terms of Monica. I think her performance as Monica will probably rank higher for most people that like it does for you than it is on my list. But so my lists here are very different. Like, there's a world where you could think, oh, they're going to be the same for performance or show. No, au contraire. So performance, okay. So I'm going number 1. I can't believe I'm doing this, but I'm going Cougar Town for number 1. I don't know if it's just like my Scream 4 Gale being reawakened by Scream 7, but I just think that she is so towering. When I think of Courteney Cox and what defines her career, and it's Cougar Town, it's Jules, it's just the power that she exudes, and she just commands that show with the comedy. It's just so memorable. It just leaves such an impact. So I go Cougar Town, then 2, I go Shining Vale. For all the reasons you said, it's smart, dramatic. It shows a lot of range. I think this is the most range she ever gets to show in any performance she's ever given. 3, this is also going to surprise you. I'm going Dirt. Okay, I love everything that I said about Dirt. Like the only reason I like Dirt is because of Courtney. Not the only reason, but most of the reason is Courtney. And I love that season 1 arc. I love the drama. I love the bitchiness. I love everything. She gets to be front and center. It's like the first time Courtney Cox gets to do drama outside of Scream 2, in my opinion. I love that. And last, I'm going Monica, just because for me, there are other friends I like maybe a smidge more than Monica. Like I'm a huge Phoebe fan. I love Rachel, and it's when I think of friends, it's more of the ensemble, and I just kind of think that the other characters are a bit deeper and more complex. So I'm sorry.
All right, that's fair. That's fair. Hey, that's fair. That's fair.
With that being said, I'm just going to go out and say Friends, however, is my number 1 choice for the show. So how would you go for ranking these shows, Brendon?
So I agree. Friends is the top. Incredible classic. Then I go Shining Vale. Then I go Cougar Town. Then I go Dirt.
Yeah. And I'm the same way. Like, I actually kind of debated, do I put Cougar Town or Shining Vale? But I think Shining Vale is such a unique product, and it's just a step above. And again, I think Cougar Town, it went on for so long, and like, I don't think that the later seasons are as good as the first 2. Whereas Shining Vale, even though I criticize season 2 a little bit, I still think that season 2 has a lot of the quality of season 1. So I think overall Shining Vale is a stronger show. But yeah, I think Friends, where it's interesting, where Friends kind of like lacks for me in the performance ranking. It's there's no question. Like Friends is like the crowning achievement of her career, just from a product standpoint among these shows. So and Dirt has to be last because it's just.
I agree.
Question now. Where would we put Scream and Gale Weathers in these lists? Where would it go in your list from 1 to 4, with Friends being at number 1?
It would be number 1. Scream is what started everything for me. So I actually think, listen, this is in the 90s. So I was a teenager in the 90s, even a preteen in the 90s. So I think I watched Scream before I really was watching Friends. So I fell in love with Courtney and Gale, and that was the reason why I started watching Friends. So Scream is kind of the end all be all for me. So Scream is ahead of Friends for me. Scream is my long-term spooky soap opera, and I love it.
Yeah, I mean, Scream is the defining thing in my life. If Scream is my favorite movies or movie franchise, Friends is my favorite comedy show. Like, number 1, nothing beats it. So, but Scream does come in over Friends. I love Friends, but Scream is Scream. What about her performance? Where would you put Gale Weathers among all the others?
So Gale and Pat from Shining Vale, I think, are very close in regards to performance and acting. I think there's an argument for both, but I put Gale ahead just because we have 30 years of that character, and we've seen such a big range of Gale Weathers over these 7 films. So I think that is kind of the more fleshed out character where we've seen her do a huge range throughout these 7 films. But Shining Vale is a very close second because I think we get a huge range in those 2 short seasons with her. But Gale edges it out for me.
Because I have Cougar Town and then Shining Vale. For me, there's no question. Like Courtney Cox in my mind is Gale Weathers. Like that's how I define her. That's how I associate her. And all this stuff is just extra. It adds so much depth to Gale Weathers. Gale is like the central thing. I think both for her acting, because we see so many different shades of Gale through Gale's evolution and her regression. But I also just think like, we get to kind of see almost like, a little bit of each of her TV characters in Gale in some way. So for me, it's Gale Weathers. It will always be Gale Weathers. And I just love the fact that Courtney has done so many projects that are so long running. Yes, Dirt and Shining Vale got cut short, but I have no doubt that Shining Vale should have gone on, but, at least with Friends and Cougar Town and Scream, it's like she's been on these things for, 6, 7 and 10 iterations of the characters. So I love that part of her career. And I think that's my favorite part of being a Courtney Cox fan, to be honest.
For sure. And I think it's time for a new Courtney show. I feel like, it's been a couple years since Shining Vale. I think let's hopefully cook up a new real juicy role for Courtney to do on TV because I miss seeing her, every week. We get to see her on social media and doing her home court, but I need I need some more like Courtney acting soon. So yeah. I'm hopeful.
Well, Brendon, please tell everybody where they can find you online.
You can find me on Instagram, brendon.nyc. It was a pleasure, Ryan. I love talking Courtney with you anytime.
Same here. So thank you, Brendon.
Thank you so much.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the next segment of Scream with Ryan C. Showers. I'm your host, Ryan C. Showers, and this is the Taylor Swift song of the week. This is Courtney Cox's birthday week. So everyone, please welcome my co-host, Ashley. Hey, Ash.
Hello, everybody. Hello. It is me, Ashley.
Well, Ashley, what is the Taylor Swift song of the week for Miss Cox?
The Taylor Swift song of the week is Hoax. Hoax came out in 2020 off of Folklore. It is track 16. It was produced and written by Taylor and Aaron Dessner. To me, this song just like sounds like being unwilling to kind of move on or like get out of a toxic situation, relationship, whatever it is. That I mean, sometimes people literally, it feels impossible to leave those. Sometimes it is impossible. And that's kind of how I've always thought of Hoax is being stuck somewhere impossible.
Do you like Hoax as a song in terms of like the other songs on Folklore, or is it probably towards the second half of the album for you?
The fact that I have to think about it makes me think that it's towards the end
Yeah.
because I don't, it's not like the song that like I immediately think of when I think of Folklore.
Mm-hmm.
And if somebody was like, "Oh, you can never listen to Folklore again," I wouldn't be like the first songs that I think about that I would never get to hear again. You know what I mean? Like it's not up in that category. But I do like this song. It's just not in my higher ranking, but it's kind of sad because I think this song is great. And when I do listen to it, I love it. It just doesn't have, I don't want to say like, I don't want to use the word catchy as in like a,
Mm-hmm.
like get stuck in my head. But I mean like that thing where like something like you get like that earworm or something is constantly like with so many Taylor songs, like they're almost like in repeat in my head because I find that catchiness to it. I just don't
Mm-hmm.
feel that same connection to the song, but that doesn't mean it's not good to me at the same time, if that makes sense.
I am an emotional cutter and I love this song. I love this song. It's very cold and I understand why people kind of forget about it because there's so many great things on Folklore and it's not and Taylor herself even says that it's a bunch of different things. And she's described it in the Long Pond studio sessions as confessions, emotion, nature, several fractured situations combined into one story. It all works for me. And like, I've always just, I love the piano ballad aspect of it. I love the imagery, but now I love it because of Courteney Cox and Gale Weathers. Like, I feel like this song summarizes so much of Gale Weathers' journey in the last three movies. I was listening to this during Gale Week. Even though Gale Weathers in Scream 7, she presents on the surface as funny and fierce, she's always a joy when she's on screen in Scream 7. Yet underneath that joy, there is a deep sadness, and she's a very lonely person on the inside, I think. And that's what makes her so great in Scream 7. This song, Hoax, almost feels like it's about Gale's life between, you know, the divorce with Dewey, Dewey's passing, her injuries, the nerve damage, the fact that her show was canceled, and that she's kind of scrappy with Chad and Mindy. This song really captures her in so many different ways. But yeah, I love this song so much. So
Me too. I think it's so beautiful. And there is like a lyric in the song now that I think about it that I think of like I literally think about it all the time. So
okay.
guys, I'm back at it and I'm saying I was wrong because there is a lyric that I sing all the time.
Let's go through the lyrics here. So the song starts out, my only one, my smoking gun, my eclipsed sun, this has broken me down. My twisted knife, my sleepless night, my winless fight, this has frozen my ground. And I mean, like my only one, Dewey, my smoking gun, the smoking gun that killed Dewey, my eclipsed sun, you know, Dewey's gone, but she's not. And she's kind of stuck in this weird funk of a world. This has broken me down, kaboom, right? My twisted knife, she was stabbed a million times in Scream 6. My sleepless night, I can just imagine her in her apartment, just sad and frustrated about all these different things that she's dealing with, about, you know, the loss of Dewey, you know, and everything that she's gone through personally. And I feel like with her, it is a winless fight. And she says, this has frozen my ground. What you said at the top of the show about like an unwillingness to move on, I don't think that Gale, even though she is moving on and she is jolly and happy and she's with the twins and she's has forward moving momentum, I don't think that she moves on mentally, emotionally from this era of her life because of just so much loss. I don't know if she can fully deal with it. So I think part of her just sits in it and builds the exterior just because that's who she is. Ashley, thoughts?
Yeah, I totally agree. I think one of the reasons why I love Scream is because I don't think that the trio, Sid, Dewey, Gale, ever feel like they've won. Like
Mm-hmm.
they feel relief, but the actions they have to take to get to the finish line, quote unquote, aren't things that they want to ever have to do. And I don't feel like they're excited that or they're not like they don't feel like they won. They always feel like there was so much loss. And I don't think you can ever move past that. And I really do like the idea of like frozen because there's something about when people really express how sad they are or express their emotions, a lot of times people feel like they're unable to move on. But
Mm-hmm.
really, I think those people are moving on in a probably healthier way a lot of times than the people who are unable to even think about what's going on, and it just stews and stews and stews. And then, and I mean, like, not me criticizing, I've been there. It just kind of festers away at you, and you don't realize how much until way down the road. But I feel like Sydney probably in some ways handles this trauma a little bit in like a healthier like mental health aspect wise, whereas Gail, I feel like thinks she's being tough, but
Mm-hmm.
I think we've all realized that expressing emotion and realizing what you do, like to me, like one of the strongest things people can do is like to cry about what they're upset about, because
Yeah.
allowing yourself to actually feel all those emotions is honestly so brave and powerful, because there's been stuff that I've experienced that I haven't grieved yet because I was like, I am not ready to like feel all of that yet. And I feel like Sydney sometimes does that. I don't want to say better, but I think she does it healthier maybe than Gail. I think Gail is kind of stuck in. And I think I love how that beginning, like the smoking gun, the sun, the knife, sleepless night, those can all be so literal for
Yeah.
Gail, but they can also be like obviously metaphors for her as well.
Exactly.
And I also love smoking gun because that's such like a reference to working in the press or the news. And it's just like, oh, I've got the smoking gun on this person. Her smoking gun would also be like her figuring out that about like the Maureen Prescott story and being like, oh, I've got the smoking gun. Literally, she has this going on. And that would also be like her trauma, right?
Yeah.
Like realizing what she did to her dear friend. And like, I think all of those things would be in her mind at night.
First of all, I love that. Oh my God, the smoking gun. You're right. That's what they call it in the news business. So then the bridge goes, stood on the cliffside, screaming, haha, give me a reason. Your faithless love is the only hoax I believe in. Don't want no other shade of blue but you. No other sadness in the world would do. My best laid plan, your sleight of hand, my barren land, I'm ash from your fire. So I love how your name's in there, Ash. But
I
like,
know. I just thought about that while I was sitting here, and I was like, why have I not taken that part and just been like, I am Ash? Put it on my Instagram at the very beginning.
you should.
I
I want to
should.
point out that both what the outfits that Gale and Dewey wear around his death, they're both wearing blue. Dewey's wearing that blue colored shirt whenever he dies. She wears blue in the finale with the stripes. Don't want no other shade of blue but you. No other sadness in the world would do. And I think that this is interesting. I think that your faithless love is the only hoax I believe in. Dewey left her. He abandoned her in New York, and they divorced. And I think that that's kind of what the song, how you could apply it to Gale Weathers, like, even though he abandoned her, that love is the only love that she believes in, even though it's not even real, even though he's not even around anymore. And I just also imagine like that, stood on a cliffside screaming, give me a reason. That is very much Gale Weathers right now. Again, I think this is part of her like inability to move on. Everything you described and like her inability to like process her grief, and it goes along with like her best laid plan, and how she was given a sleight of hand over and over across these movies, specifically 5, 6, and 7, and Taylor sings My Barren Land, I'm ash from your fire. That's probably like if when you see Gale Weathers in Scream 7 and she's shaking and her body aches and, she's saying to Sydney, I think about him 500 times a day. That is like, I think I get that metaphor, the ash from your fire. So Ash, what are your thoughts?
Yeah. The line that I think about or I sing in my head all the time is give me
Me,
a
a
reason.
reason.
But I really love that line because when she's talking about like it says like stood on the cliffside screaming, give me a reason,
Mm-hmm.
that can be interpreted two ways in my opinion. It could be
Okay.
being like, okay, give me a reason to jump, like give me a reason. Or
Um,
it could be saying, give me a reason to stay here. Like
yeah.
give me a reason to not. So it can be like there's like this like I think sometimes it can be a little like almost like, okay, like do one more thing and I'm out. You know what I mean? Like when you're in an argument and that's just like they're pushing and pushing and then you kind of push and be like, okay, like if you do this, then like I'm done or like whatever. And then they do that thing and then you don't actually storm out. And like I think cliffside can be a metaphor for leaving, like
Yeah.
not literally jumping. But she's saying like to me it can be give me a reason to go or give me a reason to stay. I really love that. And yeah, don't want any other shade of blue but you is one of my favorite. I don't want to say one of my favorite lines Taylor's ever written because that's just crazy, but at the same time, I think it's accurate because it's just, I see how sad you are, but I like your sadness is okay with me. Like it's like
Mhm.
being like I can be in this blue state with you forever because I'm with you. And that is also so unfair to both of the people in that situation
Mhm.
because it's almost like, "Oh, well, you're blue all the time, but I'm just gonna accept it," which, like, a partner should accept it, be like, "Okay, like, I can work with this person who's dealing with this," because I think blue as being another word for depression, and, when Taylor's using this in this line, and I think, like, I have a lot of moments of being depressed, and Garrett is always super supportive of me, but at the same time, like, he's not gonna just be like, accept the fact that I'm this way, like, forever, like, of course, he's gonna give me time, but if it was getting to a point of a terribleness that was putting strain on our relationship, I think he would say, like, "We need to do something about this. We need to
Yeah.
help both of us because this is becoming too hard for both people in the relationship," and it feels sometimes like with Gail and Dewey that Dewey didn't know how to, like, process everything that had happened without cutting the ripcord like, from Gale, like, he had to cut, like, that line that connected them to be able to, like, go into his grief and his depression, like, he couldn't because Dewey was so happy-go-lucky all the time,
Mhm.
and I just feel like this was like, he, like, cut that line to her to almost save her, but it kinda, like, took him down.
It totally did, and, like, he isn't the greatest communicator, so I can imagine how frustrating Gale must be sometimes. I mean, I can see how they both would bring out the best and the worst in each other. I can picture Gale kind of being the Taylor and Dewey being the Joe here, where there is, like, this wall put up that she can't really penetrate. So, yeah, I love that point, Ash. So this next part, the bridge, oh my god, whenever I heard this, I couldn't unhear it. I was so excited. I mean, it's devastating, but it's like from a Gale Weathers perspective, I was so excited. So, she says, "You know, I left a part of me back in New York. You knew the hero died, so what's the movie for? You knew it still hurts underneath my scars from when they pulled me apart. You knew the password, so I let you in the door. You knew you won, so what's the point of keeping score? You knew it still hurts underneath my scars from when they pulled me apart. But what you did was just as dark. Darling, this was just as hard as when they pulled me apart. My only one, my kingdom come undone, my broken drum, you've beaten my heart." And these first three lines, like, this is Scream 6, Scream 5, Scream 7. You knew I left a part of me back in New York, aka the part of her that possibly died in her apartment with the attack scene when she, was stabbed up a million times by Quinn. You knew the hero died, so what's the movie for? Dewey is dead, so what is her life now? In terms of like this part of herself that she used to share with Dewey specifically, so that's Scream 5. He was the hero, and like that's what the whole point of his arc was, that he wasn't a coward, that he was being heroic, trying to help Sam and Tara. And the worst part is, you knew it still hurts underneath my scars. And that is literally the best example of like what Taylor could have done to show Gale Weathers nerve damage. And like she's literally holding her arm at times, it's just like, wow. I mean, I just think this is like almost like the diary of Gale Weathers in Scream 5, 6, and 7. Ash, what are your thoughts?
You said it perfectly, but it also, like, so different than, like, how I imagined it when you, like, put this song to Gale. Like, it's exactly the same, but totally different. Like, when she said, "You know I left a part of me back in New York," I imagined her saying that to Dewey, being like,
Aw.
"You know I left a part of me back in New York," meaning, I am here because, like, she wanted to be in New York and, like, they're having an like, I imagine them having an argument about him being like, "I don't wanna live in New York anymore," and her, like, being like, "No, like, part of me is there," like, like and, like, just her explaining that, like, he is with her in New York, like, part of their relationship is in New York, like, there's, like, these memories there, and then it says and then I imagine her, like, talking to whoever being like, "You know the hero died, so what's the point of this anymore?" Like, almost like the new ghost faces that come being like, "He's already dead, like,
Yeah.
what is the point of all of this?" And then I imagine her saying to Sydney, like, "You knew it still hurts underneath my scars." Just because it's like, "You knew" it reminds me of her being like, "You can relate, like, you know this pain."
Mhm.
But I love how, like, it makes sense for, like, what we're both saying, it's like there's, like, literal and, like, there's metaphorical meanings behind how it can be related to Gale, like, it just makes the song is, like, so perfect for her, but, like, "You knew the password, so I let you in the door." I love that because it's almost like her talking about like learning how to trust people and seeing like how they react to it. And like, what's the point of keeping score is so funny because I feel like Gale is a keeping score type of person. So like, I think it makes
Said she is the queen of
perfect.
keeping score.
Yeah, like I think it makes complete sense. And like when she's like, what you did was just as dark as like she's to me, that means like she's saying like this you leaving me was just as painful as going through a literal stabbing.
And you could also just look at this like too. I know like it's like apples and oranges, but like, Dewey leaving her in the literal sense of like leaving her from New York, like walking out on her, getting the divorce, but also leaving her in the earth, passing. It's so deep and so sad. I have like chills just talking about this right now. But like also this line, we could look at it even a third way. I left a part of me back in New York. That part of her when Dewey was there and she had everything. She had a new talk show. She was still married to Dewey and she was happy. And like it's like there is a part of her that was left in that metaphorical sense. But I do think overall, like it's so interesting. My kingdom come undone. It's interesting how much Gale goes through in these movies, right? She goes from, being married to Dewey and like in a great spot after Scream 4. Then she gets this big break. She's kind of like the queen of the world. Then it's just like, one thing after the other kind of breaks her down, So it's very beautiful. So any final thoughts?
Yeah, and for it to end, don't want any other shade of blue but you, no other sadness in the world would do. I think it's like so perfect because it's like to me that's saying like all I really want is like there's all of those things and like all of her ambition. And don't get me wrong, like I think she should have all of that. But I think like when she realizes like that he's really gone, she's like, if I could take it all back and just have him back, like that's all. Like she shouldn't have to give up anything, but I think she is thinking in her mind, like if I could just give it all away, like if I could go back in time and move back with him, like I wish I would have, even though that wouldn't have worked. Like in her mind, she wants to, and no other sadness in the world would do. Is also, I think, a beautiful line because I think like it's almost like I'd rather be sad and think about you and have you in my memory than forget you.
Gorgeous. Maybe she does think about that. Maybe she does because like I romanticize things all the time. And I can imagine Gail thinking maybe if I had never left Woodsboro and if I had just kept writing silly stab books, living in this small town, that everything would be different. But of course it wouldn't be, of course, and she shouldn't have to sacrifice, opportunities. But like, it's just it's so deep, and I think best Taylor Swift segment ever.
Yeah, it's definitely up there with that. It's always I feel like it's always Gale.
Yeah.
Taylor and Gale.
Kindred spirits. So
Hmm.
okay, well, Ash, thank you so much for going through Hoax with me and Gale Weathers.
Oh, I am honored and not in not in
Double
that way.
speak.
I know. I was like, and I just said honored when speaking about the death of Dewey, and that feels gross.
Oh my gosh. Well, Ash, thank you so much.
All copyrighted material used or referenced in this show belong to their rightful owners and made possible by the Fair Use Act.
And number 3, never, ever, ever, under any circumstances say, I'll be right back. Because you won't be back.
Get another beer, you want one?
Yeah, sure.
I'll be right back!
Dear God, Ryan,